Teaching a player how to play your game is as important as the game's design itself. You have to teach the player how to play, otherwise they might think your game is bad, and sometimes they're right. Now, I'm not talking about teaching the controls, even though some devs could use a couple lessons.
Use the up directional button, the down directional button, the left directional button, and the right.
I'm talking about teaching the player concepts and mechanics. You know, the tutorial level. A vertical slice of what the player will experience throughout the game, wrapped up nice and neat with a spike through his chest. How you teach a player is really up to you. Whether you want to just open the game up and let the player explore, occasionally throwing them a really well drawn instructional leaflet, or the stop everything you're doing and read this approach. And who could forget the condescending camera calibration option?
Look right! Good! Look left! Good! You should be familiar with the left and right controls now!
But what if you could teach the player through the gameplay without them knowing they're learning, while also compensating for any level of game familiarity? In the industry, it's called conveyance, which refers to methods of teaching the player without explicitly saying anything. Ever since I watched a very grumpy man explain this, I've been calling it learning through gameplay. Now, some things are easy to teach. Jump, crouch, bombs. These aren't secrets. Put the player in a situation where they have to use the mechanic and away you go. But what about something that defies convention? What about a shooter that doesn't want you to shoot the head, but rather sever the limbs? What about Dead Space 2, a dark, spooky game that puts you into the very cool metal shoes of Isaac Clarke, a man who is not above punching the heads off of children, and I wish people would stop saying that he is. What it does as a game is quite scary and icky and excellent, but what I really want to focus on is its teaching strategy, learning through gameplay. I'm very proud of myself. Movement! Some say it's a pretty big deal in gaming. Typically, developers like to give the player a chance to feel the character, free of any additional conflicts. How does Dead Space 2 do this? By binding Isaac's arms and telling the player how to run. This is both a tutorial on which button to use and your objective rolled into one simple instruction. Run! No additional motivation required. They know why they're doing this. Now, most high-end devs like to give the player a safe environment to teach new mechanics. One without enemies, or maybe with stuff inside of it you can use the new mechanic on. Dead Space 2 puts the player in a room that they can't leave without using Kinesis, an ability that utilizes parts from enemies and nearby objects that serves as a very important part of the game's meta. They can mess around with this new ability all they want, but unbeknownst to them, the moment they blast open the way forward, two necromorphs will burst into the room. The player is not told how to solve this problem, but the setup of this medical theater does give them plenty of time to prepare themselves, something the player might be getting a little too used to up to this point. Moments later, the player is told they can stomp on corpses to get sweet loot, but they fail to mention that some of the corpses are not dead yet. This to me is akin to overwhelming the player in a roguelike to make them die for the first time, or the seemingly unfair elements in a Souls game. Like a little wink from the developers saying some things you're gonna have to figure out the hard way.
Stompy, stompy, stomp. Stompy, stompy.
I'm not dead!
He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm getting better!
No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment. Oh, I can't take him like that.
There are a lot of ways to confirm that a player knows how a major mechanic works. Super Metroid gives the player no option but to use the mechanic to progress, while 2 Human throws info at the player and basically tells them to do their own practice and then learn more in the controls tab. Dead Space 2 puts us in a room where we find this poor lad who was undergoing some sort of open chest surgery when the outbreak began. When Isaac begins to cut the guy out, a necromorph comes in and just disrespects the guy. The player now finally has a weapon, but shooting the head doesn't work? No headshot damage? Oh, I'll never get Red Tiger on my Scorpion now. Because necromorphs are reanimated corpses, they don't rely on things like a nervous system or even face skin, so removing the limbs is a more effective strategy than the head or body. When you remove the head, they start wildly swinging around, so it's likely you'll still hit their arms and maybe even miss this second guy's head. At this point, it's still possible that a new player may not understand the importance of the whole limb thing, so they halt your forward progression with this controlled opportunity to learn that chest shots don't work and limb shots are required. And if it wasn't clear at this point, a lady calls Isaac and explains it outright.
Limbs, bro. Shoot the limbs.
This is the premise of the game, a pretty cool one, and they had the restraint to keep it to themselves for 20 minutes, although they have been hinting at it the whole time. Our next major teaching moment comes when obtaining Stasis, an ability that slows enemies down, allowing you to dismember them at your leisure. As the player enters this room, they'll find a door that's just too fast, and as they hack away at this panel, it triggers an enemy that gets hit with Stasis as they're given the prompt for how to use it. While the first moment had us demonstrate our understanding before the practical exam, this moment, similar to the plasma cutter scene, has the demonstration after. This is most likely because they needed to teach the player these mechanics in context of combat where it's possible they may not use it. So they implemented a more controlled way to guarantee the player understood. But also it's kind of funny to make people panic, I imagine. A few minutes later, Isaac walks into a room right as it depressurizes, and the game doesn't tell you how to stop it. They just assume the player will want to shoot the big glowing button. This is called visual hierarchy, a design theory that aims at guiding the viewer's attention using color, contrast, and body parts. Composition balance. It's a part of a broader game design theory called visual clarity, which allows developers of all game styles to imply how something works without words. This is also another controlled environment to give the player a chance to understand something that will happen naturally throughout the game. And if you want me to have a controlled environment to make videos full time, consider supporting the channel on Patreon and help ruin video games for others by sharing the video. You don't need to smash monsters with your head to help, just these buttons. After putting on their sick Lost in Space outfit, the player will encounter their first boss fight, where they'll have to use most of what they've learned so far. Stasis, shoot the limbs. Remember, some stuff isn't always dead.
I feel happy.
And that's Chapter 1. That's it for the learning. Right? After walking down this corridor, the player will most likely hear one of these guys. Oh, what now? Similar to the medical theater scene in the opening chaos, Visceral is very specific about the amount of time the player has to react to enemies. So here, in an unpanicked state, they are likely to hit the glowing sack. Oh, that explodes. Then 2 at a time. Oh, they do damage to things around them. Well, it's a good thing one of those things isn't very close to me. All of what we learned so far come together in 2 really cool moments that don't actually happen in this order. The first is when the game throws a bunch of enemies at the player like a synchronized dance team. Now, whether it's a panicked reaction or not, we know what the player is about to shoot. But this is actually classic misdirection, and there was an airlock there the whole time. And my final example is after a wicked ride on the craziest train imaginable, Isaac's world is flipped turned upside down. Here, the player is expected to use objects with kinesis, slow enemies with stasis, take out exploders before they get too close, and shoot a brute in his weak spot just like the Chapter 1 boss. Okay, at this point I feel like I've shown you enough examples of what I'm talking about. Throughout the beginning of Dead Space 2, Visceral Games convey new ideas and mechanics in organic ways, allowing the player to dictate the pace of the tutorial while remaining in control when necessary. This is calculated, consistent, and gosh darn Nintendo level game design by yet another company dismantled by EA. It's a respect for the player's innate desire to figure it out themselves, utilizing a brilliant set of ideas and methods while also delivering on a really great game. Of course, not all video games can do this, as some ideas are far too complicated to explain without words, or in some cases, reading the rules is actually part of the game. But even in these examples, there's a huge focus on that visual clarity thing. My intention here is not to say that Dead Space 2 is a perfect game or that any of these bad examples are bad games. Well, my intention is to highlight how it can be done well, but I'm not saying that it's easy. Even the original Dead Space, which effectively goes through all the same ideas and mechanics, does so in significantly less subtle ways. Show them. Don't tell them. Give the player an opportunity to try it. Heck, let them fail. And don't stop the momentum, and definitely don't shout at them. I know this is probably parody, but they keep doing it outside the tutorial.
Select a target and squeeze off around. Press the X and B button. Ready your weapon. Try hitting a coconut.
Teaching a player how to play your game is as important as the game's design itself, and if you're really good at it, they're the same thing. Thanks for watching.
Press the X X button to select. Press the triangle button to exit. Once you get all 3 numbers correct, they'll flash green. If you fail, they'll flash red. You can always try again.
Got it.